Welcome to Event Experience by Bizzabo, the podcast where we bring the best and brightest event experience leaders together to share stories, tips, and lessons learned from creating some of the world's biggest events. I'm Rachel Moore, your podcast host. When your event takes place at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, you're on a whole new level as an event professional. Our guest is former White House Social Secretary Deesha Dyer, and she's about to guide us through what it was like to plan the visit by Pope Francis to the White House during the Obama administration. From music choices to wardrobe changes, the world stage is set for a truly unique event experience. Today, across from me on microphones for this podcast by Bizzabo Event Experience, I am speaking to someone who previously held the role of Social Secretary for the White House during the Obama administration. Yes, everyone pause and go ooh and ah, because that's pretty amazing. Chief of Staff for the Ford Foundation. She serves on several boards, including the Humane Society for the United States, Mindful Schools, and BGirl.org. And today, she is the president of Hook and Fasten Consulting. I am speaking with Deesha Dyer on this podcast. Deesha, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. And I am super excited to dig in. I'm such an event geek, so I'm excited.
I think our whole listenership are event geeks. I really just gave a super brief overview. Can you tell us a bit more what your current role as president of Hook and Fasten Consulting? What all does your world entail on a daily basis?
Definitely. So my role right now, I'm the founder and president of Hook and Fasten, as you mentioned. It's a company that basically focuses on partnerships, authentic partnerships, messaging events between companies and organizations that are on the ground. And so it kind of combines both worlds of White House world, Ford Foundation world, but also the world that I had before the White House, which is like a community organizer. We do a lot of things that take whatever the product is or the industry or the sector of the company or corporation, and we find a parallel to a community organization that's doing that same work or that needs or uses that product. For instance, an infant formula company that makes infant formula, I then go ahead and say, well, how can we get this to local organizations, people under the poverty line? How can we craft events to lift up this awareness, also distribute formula and some other things? And so I do that on a myriad of scales. So that's basically, what Hook and Fasten does on a daily basis, is just creating partnerships, as a business owner looking for a new business.
Well, and the name is perfect then, Hook and Fasten, because you're bringing two things together, merging them in the middle, if you will, and really using your wealth of experience in the background to do that. Just sounds like a dream job. It's like when people ask you, like, hey, if you won the lottery and you could do whatever you wanted and you could have that kind of impact. I mean, I'm sure that's resonating with a lot of our listeners. Like, oh my gosh, that sounds amazing what you're doing. I'm sure that's got to be really fulfilling for you and as well as the people.
100%. I mean, it is. It is one of these things where I get to really put the power back in the community, where we say, okay, this company has this product, but what do you need? How would you like it distributed? How can we support you? And so we listen to the community, we bring them into conversations. So as a company, we're not assuming that we know what people need. Like there's no way I know what houseless people need. That's not where I am. And, so I can't assume, but being able to say, let's bring in some people from the community, pay them for their time, reward them, and craft something that can benefit, I think it's a dream. And then the event part of it, being able to just do events where you bring people together and have fun and not always focus on the problems or the situations, is totally my thing. So yeah.
All right. We're going to segue into some get to know you questions. What are your go-to on the ground event day shoes, the ones that get you through the whole day?
It depends on the event. So I wear my Hakas, like all preparing, build, run-throughs, walkthroughs, unless it's like a press thing where we have pictures, but like I wear them up until the event time. And then I switch usually to Clarks. I have a couple pair of Clarks that I actually put an extra Dr. Scholl's insole in them. And so I usually wear like Clark's flats, always flats. I have them in different pairs, basically like brown, white, black and red. So I can just switch it with any outfit. If it requires some kind of heels, I usually do like a Steve Madden or something that's just like a generic shoe because
Yeah.
I'm going to wear it into the ground. I try not to do heels at all unless it's again a event that has open press or an event that
Right.
like somebody is taking pictures. Then I kind of do that. If it's like a very decadent event, that it's a proper thing to do.
Yeah.
But I would say my hop is up until the point that I need to change into the Clarks.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I love it.
Mhm.
Yeah. This has been such a great question too. So hopefully people are going at me like, oh, I've got my new recommendation for my event day shoe.
Yes, and I'm about to go back and get some recommendations from other people too. I'm always open and interested in that. So yeah.
Exactly. That's the key thing. What are you listening to or watching or reading these days that
Mm.
you can't put down?
What I will say about listening to, I listen to a lot of 90s hip hop. Like I'm completely stuck in the 90s. Yeah, I was a hip hop writer, a journalist for hip hop for a number of years. And so I'm kind of stuck in that era just because it reminds me of such a simpler time.
Yeah.
But I'm also obsessed with the Dave Matthews Band. So I'm definitely like a 90s kid that like still goes to concerts and whatnot. So I listen to Dave Matthews nonstop, Beyonce, like Taylor Swift, like I think anything like that gets me hype. I love pop music, but I listen to a lot of acid jazz too and house music and anything I could dance to. So I would say that. What I'm watching is I'm happy my husband's not listening because he's like, that don't be telling people that. I watch a lot of British TV and I love a game show called Taskmaster. And part of it is like they create these environments for people to do these jokes and tasks and fun things. And I'm more into like the details of like, how they get the balloon up there. Like I'm
Yeah.
totally picking it apart, like as far as like the set design and stuff like that. But I love Taskmaster, Abbott Elementary, any
Mhm.
documentaries I love. And then honestly, Rachel, I took a break from reading after writing this book. And so I read a lot of articles, a lot of feel good stuff that just makes me feel good in the world that's so chaotic. And try to limit my social media, but
Yeah.
definitely try to read like, just articles that make me feel good as in who I am and affirm me. So I would say,
Nice.
yeah. So
Excellent. No, that's great. And then speaking of that, is there a particular social post or a piece of media or even a hot take about events that you found interesting lately?
wow. I forget where I read it, but I read it about the high cost of these curated retreats, these
Mm.
women retreats. And it was a very interesting take because it was about these retreats that are marketed towards women, especially the wellness retreats. And they have like a dinner and they have like all these, things left and right, and how expensive they gotten and how like everybody does them in like the Caribbean and these
Yeah.
places. It was an interesting hot take on how like people are getting bamboozled for all this money.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting. Part of me was like, yeah, these things are expensive. Like I can't afford them to go.
Right.
But then part of me is also like, I don't think people understand that everything that they see at an event or at a dinner or whatever is paid for, like
Yeah.
down to salt and pepper shakers or down to like napkins. Like I think these beautiful curated things that are on Instagram, people don't know the price tag. And I think that
Yeah.
they're just like, oh, it's just a napkin or it's just a spoon. And you're like, no, 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 no. That dishware costs a lot of money, and if it's like got flowers, that's an extra dollar, So it wasn't an argument, but it was like going back and forth between what people think stuff cost
Yeah.
and what it actually cost. So
Hmm.
yeah, it was interesting.
Well, the thing we're going to do today, we zero in on one particular event activation. I mentioned at the start that you previously held the role of social secretary for the White House during the Obama administration. And we're going to zero in on one particular event that you pulled off. And I'm laying this up for you to tell us about it because I think everybody's going to be like, excuse me, when they hear we're about to talk about you planning a particular visit by a globally known person to the globally known venue of the White House. What are we about to talk about here?
We are about to talk about the visit of Pope Francis to the White House in 2015. And I will say that when I got the role of social secretary, this was already on the calendar.
Mm.
And I said to the previous social secretary, I was like, can you not stay through like you're leaving me with this? And he's like, uh-huh. Like kind of like, God bless, goodbye. And I was like, wait. And so that is what we're going to talk about, which ended up being one of my all-time favorite events for a number of reasons.
By the way, this is all going to be in a book that I know you are going to be releasing. I'm going to read an excerpt from this because, again, our event professionals out there, they, I think, from small to large or even very
Mm.
large, are used to working with a wealth of different teams. But I wanted to read this excerpt out of your book relating to this particular event. This is your writing, and this is amazing. I had a team of 6 in the social office that took on individual responsibilities for the visit while checking in with me on the details. In addition to us, there was the U.S. Secret Service, which led all protection details, the U.S. State Department, which served as our protocol and diplomacy experts, the White House Visitor's Office, which worked on crowd maintenance, entry, and control, the White House Military Office, which handled the pageantry and procedures for events, the White House Communications Agency, focusing on the official microphones, speakers, and overall sound, the National Security Council, helping us with the national security and policy direction, and the executive residence, which included the chefs, butlers, housekeepers, florists, calligraphers, and others. These various White House departments across the East and West wings served and support with guest list, staffing, and more. The most sophisticated and diplomatic chaos I'd ever seen, and I was somehow in charge of it all. Wow.
Even when you read it back, I'm like, oh my goodness.
Because our event professionals are such puppet masters anyway, but
Yes.
this is on that scale. I have to say, too, how you talk about the real feelings of you as a person, creating an event on that visible of a
Mhm.
stage. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that, too? Just like what that was like for you?
Rachel, I can't even believe that I survived that. I remember thinking, number one, I'm not Catholic, number two, what do they do? Like, do I need to bow? Because all of those greetings and protocol things, State Department's there to help us, but also I need to make sure I know them in case the president, first lady asks me or one of our other officials at the White House. And so for me as a person, it was very hard for me to digest that I was in charge. I kept kind of being like, well, there's clearly somebody else, and I think that as event professionals, I think that when it comes to something that big, you look at somebody else, you're in this with me. It's me and you, right? We have equal power. And they're like, no, you're in charge. And the things I couldn't control, like the weather, like it was outside. We had 12,000 people. And everybody's like, you sure you're looking at the weather? And I'm like, how am I the only person that makes a weather call? Which
Right.
I know event professionals like are probably all triggered right now because it's like, you got this big outdoor amazing event you've worked on and it's like clouds and you're like, oh my gosh. And
Right.
so I felt like I prayed a lot that day for many reasons, but I was like, clearly God's going to listen today, right? Like
Hmm.
this is the Pope, right? So like clearly you want this to go well, God. Like I was just like, and I think that for me, I had to lean heavily on other people. And I think as event professionals, we do like whether it is the catering company or whether it's the set and design team. And I think I had to learn to do that in order to get by, or I would
Yeah.
have never made
Yeah.
it.
Oh,
Never.
absolutely. As we just mentioned, you were dealing with so many teams and orchestrating so many teams.
Mhm.
You are the pinnacle person at the top who's going to make the call. A lot of weight on your shoulders there.
Ooh.
We'll be right back with more event experience after the break.
Behind every great organizer is software that makes managing the small stuff easy so you can focus on crafting events that matter. From seamless registration and on-site solutions like the BizaBox to powerful dashboards and the Click Smart Badge, Bizabo's Event Experience Operating System is your all-in-one solution to planning conferences that captivate and experiences that elevate. Visit bizabo.com, that's bizzabo.com, to learn more.
We're back with more event experience to discuss how the Pope and a president might make your metrics matter a bit differently. Everybody listening to this podcast, we're all putting on events for different reasons, right?
Mhm.
Those are revenue driven, or whether it's kind of more brand or official government business driven, which this one seems like. Let's dig into that. What were the goals around this visit, where you've got Pope Francis entourage coming in and having this whole thing? Speak to us a little bit about that, because it's from the government or political side versus saying, hey, this is strictly business. But how is it different? What were those goals?
Yeah, definitely. The goals really for us was to welcome Pope Francis as well as the American people who wanted to be there for him. There are people that brought rosaries, people that really wanted to pay their respects, right? And so I think the goal for us was to provide this welcoming environment in which he felt this was his first stop in America on that tour, but he felt like we were, united in bringing him here. I
Mhm.
think that for us, it was also the goal of showing the diversity across our nation, not having it be just, those who like or Catholic or love the Pope or, looked a certain way. It was like, we want to bring everybody into this and show the Pope the diversity of America,
Yeah.
show him the artistry. We had like a gospel choir that was there from a Catholic church, like just show him who we were, I think. And then also let him know how much we support the papacy and all that. And so I think that for us, that was really the goal. Was really, it wasn't just about him, it was also about the American people,
Yeah.
or even some people came from across, from Canada and Mexico, and so a lot of people came from all over to kind of just witness him, and that was very special. I mean, it's not like it's something that happens once a year.
Right,
It's not
right.
something that happens once every 5 years. To be able to do that was, an extreme honor, but a scary one. That I think was our goal. Really, was the welcoming. It was almost the same for every other event that we have, except we had somebody who was whole.
I want to dig into a little bit too, because this was the nightmare scenario, by the way. Can you tell us about the hole in the armpit of the dress?
Oh my gracious, Rachel, that dress. So when you say it, even I'm like, ooh, like I have a little twitch. Like listeners obviously can't see, but like my shoulder is definitely twitching. I had a dress that was very proper for welcoming a pope. You have to make sure your arms are covered, down to your knees are covered. And plus, I think just like any event professional, we want to be respectful to the culture or to the protocols of the time, right? Like that's like the last thing we need is a fashion faux pas. So I had this dress on that fit very well when I bought it, did not fit for a lot of different reasons on the day of. And I was running down the stairs. I was cleaning chairs because it was the morning dew. The chairs were wet. And so I was cleaning them. I was just trying to do something with my energy. And I heard a rip in the
Oh,
armpit of the dress. And I mean, mortified. I was like, oh my goodness. Even though I know that I could only see it. As an event professional, you don't know when you're gonna have to stretch your arm or like
right.
move something or whatever. And I just started feeling a breeze and I was like, oh my gosh, it's like actual air. Like there's a big hole there. Like, and so thankfully we have an amazing team in the resident staff who are housekeepers and seamstress and everything else. And I actually went to them to ask for a sewing kit so I
Mm.
could take it off, sew it up, and delicately put it back on. And they were like, there isn't time for that. And the dress may rip again. So
Oh,
let us sew it. And so I lifted my armpit up and they stitched that dress.
ooh.
I mean, less than 5 minutes. I had a very tight stitch that is still there because the dress, I
Oh,
still wear the
wow.
dress. So that stitch is still there. So yeah,
You have a battle
nightmare.
scar to think about, like, oh, that happened. Oh,
Yes,
no.
and I had no backup dress, you know what I mean? Like, I think that I should have had a backup. I had different backup dresses there, but not one to fit that occasion,
Right.
So yeah.
Well, and that was another thing too. Some of us might have those preconceptions again. Like, I bet I could guess what it would be like to be the White House social secretary and have to handle an event of this magnitude. But you're really painting the picture for what it was really like. And this was so relatable. And at one point, because someone perceived like, hey, I don't think you have the right dress for this occasion, you had to run to a local department store and you were
Yeah.
thinking about budget. This was not like someone was paying for you to wear something. You had to go buy it yourself and you were thinking of that. I mean, it's such a
Mm.
real dilemma for our event
Mhm.
professionals to be in, because there's just not this like whopping endless budget to make things happen. You're like, well, I've got to go be
Yes.
practical and make sure you're part of the event, pretty much, right?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes, definitely. You say you're at White House, and I think people think that, like, we all are making ridiculous amounts of money or you have these fancy clothes, in which I didn't. What you're speaking of is a China state dinner,
mhm.
and I had a dress on that, like, it was fine, but I had walked out the bathroom getting ready and my back was out, but I was wearing a shawl. I wasn't gonna walk around, and someone saw it, kind of noted that it didn't seem appropriate for me to wear that for the state dinner. It was my first state dinner, which is a huge event in DC. And so I ran to Macy's and I got a new dress, but I made sure that the dress had the price tag that you could hide it, and I
Mhm.
returned it. It was a Ralph Lauren, I think it was $300. And I remember being like, I don't have $300. And not
Mhm.
only that, but I was like very peeved because I was like, if I'm doing my job, nobody's going to see me.
Right.
Like, there's no reason to see me. They see, Mrs. Obama, the first lady, in her dress. Like,
Right.
no one's talking about my dress, which is fine. That's what I like. I'm okay with that, which is why I'm behind the scenes. Like, I like
Mhm.
watching the show. It was down to shoes. I know a lot of event folks too. The shoes, like the jewelry, just making sure that I was correct, but I didn't have endless amounts of money.
Right.
But you have to kind of figure it out on the fly, and which I did, which I still, it's the same week as the Pope. It's all unbelievable. So
Wow.
yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. Well, and speaking of choices, I want to dig into one part of the event that I believe this was your choice to do. Whenever we do zero in on a particular event, there's usually some special aspect to the event that
Hmm.
the event planner said, hey, we decided to do this and here's how it went. Can you talk a bit
Hmm.
about your choice to have an all black gospel choir perform
Hmm.
total praise for
Hmm.
the Pope and the audience at large that was part of that event?
Definitely. And so the interesting thing is I was trying to do this event as easy and simple as possible because I was like, I don't want to mess anything up. So I wasn't even thinking about music. I thought we'd have our Marine band, who was amazing service men and women who play instrument. I was like, great, we'll have the Marine band. And we had a meeting, and then Mrs. Obama's like, what's our music? And I was like, oh, we're confirming. I'd had no one. I was like, we're confirming. So it was super last minute.
Mhm.
And we had gotten a bunch of inquiries from very prestigious choirs and glee clubs and artists about performing at the ceremony because it was so big. And I said to myself, this is a chance for the world to see, number one, Black Catholics, which are a
Mhm.
lot of times not seen. A lot of people don't know Black people are also Catholic. And this is also a chance for me to get a neighborhood church who is around DC. And this church is basically made up of, men and women who are a lot of older parishioners. And so I called them and I said, do you, you have a choir, right? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, when do you rehearse? And it just happened to be the next day. And I was like, can I come by? And I went by. I asked him to sing a Total Praise, which is by Richard Smallwood. It's a song that was very popular in my family, but
Mhm.
also a lot of Black families. And they sang it beautifully, and they ended up coming for the Pope. And it was important for the world, for me and the Pope, to see a Black choir singing Total Praise. I
Mhm.
wanted people at home or people watching to be like, I recognize that song. I wanted to make sure that it spoke to people that were watching who maybe had not seen themselves in that environment or,
Yeah.
in churches or anything else. And so that was a special moment for me, a very special moment for me.
I love the realism of how it came together, but it did come together
It
under your
did.
jurisdiction. We mentioned like, what were the goals? And again, this being a different animal than, say, like, oh, I'm doing a big business conference where there's lead generation and revenue. This was more about government, political personas, relationships between countries and
Yeah.
religions. Whenever event professionals put on an event, they want to look at the metrics afterward. You've got kind of a different set of metrics when you're talking about this, because I think even one was just seeing what the New York Times is writing about this before and
Hmm.
after. Can you talk a little
Hmm.
bit about how did you gauge the success of this event? How did you know you pulled it off?
Yeah, Rachel, I'm gonna keep it honest. Like, I think definitely, what the New York Times or those things would say, because we were this obviously large venue. We had a popular pope, popular president, the world's watching. And for me, everything that we did could end up on the front paper. So we were always very careful. So I think that a review from what people, would say was a big deal. With social media, it was big then, but I wasn't paying attention to it.
Mhm.
But I will tell you that the way that I measured events was a little different in the sense that we didn't have any streakers, we didn't have any protests, and everyone stayed standing. Like, we didn't have
Mm.
any medical issues, and that nobody like embarrassed themselves. Like,
Yeah.
the Pope didn't slip, the president didn't slip, the first lady didn't slip. And I think that's how I measured events. I
Mhm.
think at that event, particularly because there have been protests and streakers in the past at different Pope visits, I was like a hawk. I mean, our plan was like breaking the lawn up a certain square, and like, you got this square, you got, if a person moved a little bit more to the left, I'm like, get on it, like, get on it. Where are they going? Is it the bathroom? Have somebody escort them.
Yeah.
So that's how I gauge success. I think with this is that we had all those people without medical incident, without protest streakers, nobody falling. There definitely was mistakes, don't get me wrong, as there always is, but only we see those things. That's how I measure success, really, was like, great, no one's running across the lawn with a message on their chest, which is great.
It really does boil down to how was the event perceived? And we just mentioned in the list of folks that you were working with, where there was a whole sector of folks who were dealing with the audio, the tech and stuff. How
Yes.
an event is going okay if nothing's going wrong. If the tech, I don't notice it. And so that sounds a
Yes.
lot like what you were going for right there.
100%. That's exactly it. And now that you say that, it's interesting. So I'm just like, that is true. Like when the tech is going well, like I don't even look over there. I don't look
Right.
at the booth. I don't look at the risers. That's actually very true. But yeah.
Well, and you did have a moment you weren't expecting when President Obama called you over once the
Mhm.
event was kind of at its completion. Can you just briefly talk to us about how that felt?
Yes. So remember the dress rip. So even though it was sewed back up, I was afraid to like move, right? President Obama and Mrs. Obama and the Pope and his interpreter were all around the book signing. And, as event folks, we are out the shot. We not seen, we're out the shot.
Mhm.
So I'm just watching it from across the room and I'm like, oh, this is great and going well and smiling. And the president started calling me over and then he was introduced me to the Pope Francis, is Holy Father. And I'm just stunned because even though I was a senior official, because I'm the social secretary, I'm not in the photo lines because I'm running the photo line. I'm
Right.
running the greets. So I didn't have plan on meeting him in that professional capacity. And the president said, I want you to meet Deesha. She's the one that's in charge of all this for you today. And he extended his hand. I feel like, a little messy. You know how we have our phones and our clipboards and our schedules and our radios and our, walkie-talkies. And so I took everything off, handed it to somebody who was like, oh my gosh, this is happening for you. And I was like, oh my gosh. And the Pope handed me a little coin that he had and shook my hand and he smiled. And I didn't realize that the White House photographer, Pete Souza, had taken a picture. And so he took a picture and I was not even like realizing that there's a picture taken, which I got a couple of months later, actually. And it
Wow.
was the perfect picture of that moment. And of course, the first thing I did was zero in on my armpit. Like, can you tell? Can you tell? Like, thank God my arm was so like, I was still self-conscious about extending. But it was a moment that meant so much because I didn't expect that. I didn't plan on it. I never asked for stuff like that.
Right.
It's not my place. And, I've got this memory forever. And everybody in the photo is smiling, which is like interesting. Like
That's
the Pope
great.
was smiling, the interpreter smiling. And I'm just like, what is happening? So
Oh,
yeah, that was
surreal.
really, really sweet.
It's no surprise that Deesha has more than one piece of advice for how event profs can skill up their event experience.
I think that the first piece of advice I would give is like, think about what your natural talent is and your natural love. Like for me, it was like music and hip hop. And so for the events I did, I always tried to think of like how I can infuse some of the things I love into my work, right? If I was like, oh, what if we had a DJ here? Or like, what if we had put a big wall and everyone does like a little graffiti mural like around education or some kind of subject? And so I think that to keep that spark alive in, how you feel about event planning and how you feel about doing these, bringing communities together and all this, no matter if it's paid, if it's whatever it's for, remember the things that you love naturally and bring those into the space. They will be welcomed. You don't have to do everything a blueprint robotic way. Like experiment. Like this is your canvas to experiment. And most of the experiments that happen in events turn out super dope, right? And then all of a sudden you'll see everybody doing it. And you're like, wait, didn't I do that? And then I'd say the second thing is, watching your mental and physical health. I think that, especially physical health, we think of ourselves last all of the time. And so sometimes we don't eat or we're just grabbing chips here and there. And I've been there, but just remember that you have one body and one heart and one mind, and you need to rest sometimes. So maybe that is letting your deputy, your second, your co-principal, whoever, run an event while you just like do strategy on it and you do like the curation of it. But watch that from your feet to your stretching to your taking time off, like to your having boundaries with your clients. Unless it's event day, obviously, like day out, build day. But remember that. And a bonus third is just bring the community in. Welcome people in. We have that special skill and people are craving community and gatherings right now. And so capitalize off of that. And also remember that as you're doing your thing, that you're not just an event planner. You're bringing people together for these feelings that they're going to take home with them. And I think that that's the power of what we do.
Thanks again to Deesha Dyer for joining us on Event Experience. And thank you for listening. If you're enjoying the show, we'd love to hear it. Connect with us on social and subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you're listening. Also, don't forget to share the show with your colleagues and friends. You can find transcripts of each episode and key takeaways on bizzabo.com/podcast. On behalf of the team, thank you. We'll gather again soon for a new episode of Event Experience.